Palworld has a ton of different passes that you can put onto your pals that allow you to go do better in battle, help farm resources easier, move around faster, etc. So for this video, let's take a look at what the recommended passes for each role you'd want. Most categories have different choices depending on your playstyle, but they all even out in the long run, while in other cases there is a definitive set of passives for that specific role. Last for the introduction, the other passives not mentioned in this guide are simply because they are just subpar or honestly just downright bad. So starting off, we'll look at possibly the most important role, the combat pal. If you're trying to maximize pal damage for a combat role, then at the end game you'll want to breed for legendary, the relevant Lord Emperor elemental damage boost passives for your pal's elemental type, musclehead, and ferocious. All of these will maximize your damage potential for a pal, but as a bonus, legendary also makes it a tiny bit more sturdy and move faster. Just so you know again that you cannot get the Lord Emperor or legendary passives until much later in the game once you start capturing in-game alpha pals or legendaries, unless you get an insanely lucky catch far earlier than should be possible. Because of that, for the early and mid game, if you're breeding pal fighters, then you should be breeding for ferocious, musclehead, hooligan, or lucky, depending on if you care about worker speed, and bulky body. This will provide you with a massive attack bonus, and the plus 20% defensive from bulky body will allow your pal to last a little bit longer. But if you prefer going max attacks, glass damage, passives, just drop bulky body and use hooligan plus lucky, or replace bulky body with a relevant 10% elemental damage increase passive, if you have no way to get the lucky trait. I personally still prefer going with bulky body because it makes my pals again last a little bit longer. However, there is something to be said about just switching out your pal when it gets to low HP, since it heals when you're inside of the sphere, and the moves are on cooldown. Small note, since the elemental damage boost passive only affects one type, you can substitute out the elemental damage boost passive again for a different attack stat boosting passive like Lucky or Hooligan, if you are trying to maximize the damage of both elemental attack types instead of one for dual type pals. For passive base workers, you generally want Artisan, Serious, and Work Slave, with the 4th slot either being Swiftness or Lucky depending on your needs and wants. You'll also want to condense up your worker pals to max star level 5 as fast as possible to improve their worker stats by 1. So for example, a tier 5 Anubis will have 4 mining instead of 3, and 5 handiwork instead of 4, etc. Also for now, this is presumably bugged, but if you upgrade, for example, a Tombat to star level 5, it goes from level 2 mining to level 3 mining. However, even with level 3 mining, the max 5-star Tombat will gain a bonus to mine ore and stone faster, but not gain the ability to mine the tier 3 material coal. We expect Pocket Pair to fix this eventually, and it's just a simple oversight, but that is the way it currently works. Similarly, ranching pals increase their yields by condensing, or in the case of pals like Vixie, the quality of the items that they find. For example, that means a tier 5 Mazzarino will make more milk per hour than a tier 1 Mazzarino, regardless of whatever passes are on both Mazzarinos. For these types of ranch pals, things like Workaholic, Dainty Eater, and the speed passives like Swiftness, Nimble, and Runner are viable alternatives to the standard min-maxed Artisan, Serious, Work Slave, Lucky strategy, and use them to keep them eating less and ranching more. Lastly though, Dainty Eater is a weird one for non-ranching pals because if you start using the foods that give work-related buffs like salad or pizza, Dainty Eater actually becomes a negative because it makes your pals eat the special food less often, which means they won't have the food buff as much as a pet that eats more often, and this means that they are working harder and not smarter. When we say active worker to differentiate it from a passive worker, we specifically mean a pal that you are using as your active commanded summoned pal while either at the base or in the field. Anubis is a prime example of this because one active Anubis that has been fully condensed up to level 5 with the passives Artisan, Work Slave, Serious, and Lucky, plus has all their max soul enhancements to work speed, can replace multiple non-enhanced Anubis with subpar passives and working speed. This can easily free up 2 to 4 slots easy in your base for other things. However, for logging or mining active pals like Adagon and Digtoise, you'll still want to use the combat role passives due to the way damage calculation works when your pal hits the natural nodes like the stone and the wood while being ridden. Mount pals are pretty easy. You just want a combination of the speed passives Legendary, Swift, Runner, and Nimble if you're going to maximize mount speed. However, for players like me, I prefer a hybrid combat mount pal, so I switch Nimble and Runner for others like Vanguard for an attack bonus to myself, Stronghold Strategist for a defensive bonus to myself, or some of the combat role passives from the first section to maximize the mount's personal damage like Ferocious or Musclehead. I personally will be breeding a Jet Dragon with Legendary, Divine Dragon, Swiftness, and Musclehead because I like having my mount being able to fight decently by itself, and Legendary plus Swiftness combined with Jet Dragon's base speed make it extremely fast, but still able to fight. Maximizing player stats would require breeding pals with things like Vanguard and Stronghold Strategist. The passive listed below can stack by having multiple pals with them on your team. That makes these passives great on mounts or pals that increase or change elemental damage while in your 5-man team or while you're riding them, or on pals specifically like Gobfin or Gobfin Ignis to boost your player damage to the maximum when added on to the Gobfin special pal ability. Similarly, you can use things like Mining Foreman and Logging Foreman to make gathering those types of resources manually faster as well. The only passive that is basically worthless is Motivational Leader, since your pals can craft things so much faster than you that even stacking this passive 5 times on every pal on your team doesn't make it even worth it. In closing, those are the tips and tricks we have for what recommended passes you would want depending on what role you're looking to fulfill for a pal. If you enjoyed our guide, why not throw us some algorithm love by doing all the YouTube things YouTube loves, and other than that, have a good night.